I'm sure that many of my viewers are more than familiar with these camcorders and may even be tired of seeing them, and if that is the case, I would sincerely apologize for another video on these camcorders, and if this isn't your cup of tea or if it holds no interest, then I would certainly recommend that you skip ahead or change videos altogether. But the thought occurred to me after running into some issues with this Sony Handycam. I have more camcorders than I know what to do with, and that's probably not an advisable idea, putting them on the ground, but there's no other place for them, and the lighting is just hard in this area. It's very bright toward the back, but right in the front where I'm actually working, I struggle to see things. But anyway, as I was mentioning, this is the Sony TRV140 digital 8 camcorder. As it turns out, there's a small plastic bushing, if that's the right word for it. It looks not unlike a plastic pen tube, you know, the thing that the ink sits in. And that goes in between the roller and the metal pin that it rests on, and that, I believe, provides enough friction to hold this in place. And that commonly wears out over time, and then these rubber rollers just fall out, and people usually believe that their camcorders are no longer in functional condition, when, if they had the right amount of knowledge and they knew about this, they'd probably be able to just get their camcorders back in working condition if by doing nothing more than just slipping this back on a metal pin, as I commonly did before this mechanism decided to act up in other ways. I don't know what exactly is causing the problems. I didn't think to write down the error code yet or look it up online, but suffice it to say that whatever is causing that error code is pretty serious in nature. I know that this had some problems ejecting a tape. When I went to eject the tape and pull it out of the mechanism, there was quite a bit of resistance, and I tried wiggling it back and forth ever so slightly and very gently, and it felt to me as if the lid of the tape wasn't, there's a little mechanism, a sub-mechanism if you want to call it that lifts up this protective flap that covers the tape. And sometimes, every now and again, it gets a little stuck and needs a little coaxing to release. And if you aren't careful, you'll pull this up and this flap will stay open and break that. I think that might have happened, but I'm not too sure, because I did this very gently, and I've had this happen on a few other camcorders. I've been able to sidestep around it just by very gingerly rocking the tape back and forth and moving it up and down. I don't even know if that's the problem. It could be something else entirely. I decided to try out a replacement screen, and if you watched my TRV140 video of this camcorder, you probably remember that I had a replacement screen I purchased online. As it turned out, it was a dud. Somebody had taken it off of a stripped out camcorder that had been submerged or exposed to water in one way or another. I don't know if it was an extremely humid environment or it was actually underwater for any length of time. It beats me, but it was severely corroded, oxidized, there was rust everywhere, and after swapping it, going through the whole swapping process, attaching all the cables, it didn't work. So then I tried another camcorder display, this time off of a Sony, I believe a CCD TRV108, and it being the same sized screen, there shouldn't be any problems. Like when I tried unsuccessfully to install this 3.5-inch display on the TRV140, that just didn't work. But the second screen, the properly sized screen that wasn't broken, that I purchased to replace the oxidized and corroded one, well, it exhibited the exact same behavior as this original screen. So right then and there, I knew there was something wrong with the internals of this camcorder and not the display itself. It was a bittersweet moment. Yes, the original screen isn't broken, it works just fine, but at the same time, it's going to be a significant amount more of work to now disassemble this camcorder and gain access to its innards, and eventually gain access to the main board, the motherboard. Because on a lot of these TRV140 series Handycams, I've noticed that are selling for in used or as is for parts are not working condition on sites such as eBay.com, people mention that either the display is completely dark and you can't see anything, or the viewfinder is dark and you can't see anything, or both. So that's a pretty serious, it must be a pretty serious epidemic with these camcorders, because very many of the for parts condition camcorders that I'm finding all have those issues. So it must be a chronic problem with this series of Handycams. Maybe Sony cheapened out and used inferior components. I'm unsure, and I think I'll ever get a straight answer, being that these camcorders are definitely not nearly as popular as they once were, and so there's very little interest in figuring out what was the cause of the problems in this day and age. It's 2016, and these camcorders are from 2002. So the thought occurred to me as I was thinking one day, well, how about I go ahead and source replacement parts online? They can't be too terribly expensive. What with HD, 60p, 4K, and even 3D camcorders aplenty online, these camcorders are falling into obscurity. Thankfully, obscurity helps to reduce the supply and demand, and thus appropriately the prices. And I didn't really want to buy another camcorder to sacrifice for this one. That would be a bit counterintuitive. If I were to buy a new camcorder that works, or rather a used camcorder that works, well, I'd just use that. Why would I take the parts out of that camcorder and put it in here? Just, it doesn't make any sense. So instead, I wanted to source just the replacement parts that I needed to make this a working camcorder once more. As it currently stands right now, I'll remove the battery from the TRV608. This is a high 8 model. This is the digital 8 model. I'll install the battery, make an attempt to at least, one-handed. Through some wishful experimentation on my part, I was under the impression that I might have been able to remove the board from this camcorder and put it into this camcorder. A terribly misguided idea now in hindsight. As we all know, hindsight is 20/20. I don't know where that idea came from or how I got away with thinking that, because it doesn't make much sense. This is an analog high 8 camcorder. This is a digital 8 camcorder. They use different technologies, and consequently the boards in them, the main circuit board, is going to differ between the two models. So that was just a terribly misguided idea that was one that I probably should have thought better of, but never did. So I ended up following through and assembling these camcorders, and so now this camcorder has the main board from the TRV608. So if I power this camcorder on by installing this battery and opening the screen, I'm going to notice some interesting behavior on the LCD that you probably won't see anywhere else. It has some very interesting pixelation, enlarged and magnified display, more so than what we should see, and a white line going across the screen. Fear not, the screen isn't damaged, it's just a problem that's being caused because it's using a board inappropriate and ill-suited for this camcorder's configuration. I figured, well, why not disassemble these camcorders once more, take a look at the insides one last time, and this time reassemble them with the correct parts. Not only the correct parts, but replacement parts. The disassembly process of these camcorders is straightforward in nature, just so long as you can follow a service manual, a disassembly guide. Boiled down, that's really what it is, just a disassembly guide, because I'm not testing anything, I just need to learn how to disassemble it. And it's, as I mentioned, straightforward in nature, just so long as you can follow along. And it is very simple once you become accustomed to the process. For example, this, going off of what it tells us, wants us to begin with removing this front lens shroud assembly. It may not be the correct terminology, but that's just what I'm going to go with. You can find one of these service manuals online. Type in any of these 5 model numbers online, along with the term service manual or PDF, and you should find at least one result from some generous individual that took the time to upload his and provide it for other people to benefit from, which is how I got this one, and I just printed out the section that I need. If I had printed out the whole service manual, I'd probably need to cut down a tree. As much as I'm sure many people would like for this to be a demonstrational and educational how-to or tutorial video, such as it may come across as at first, It isn't, and it isn't intended to be. This is just a meandering video to serve as a diary of sorts, documenting my experiences during and after the disassembly process. So if you're looking for a how-to video, look elsewhere. This is more so of just an informative, educational, and dare I even call it an entertaining disassembly video of a Sony Handycam. You might not know it, but it proves immensely useful to have proper tools to service and work on and properly repair electronic or any kind of equipment. And now to begin with the disassembly process. Catch you in just a few moments. It's been a matter of mere moments since I just put down the camcorder, and already progress is taking place at a rapid pace. The front panel has been successfully removed from the camcorder. Don't worry, it will soon be reacquainted with the camcorder, as will be the case for the rest of the soon-to-be removed pieces that comprise this camcorder. Great care must be taken to avoid destroying the ribbon cables used for various components. You can see here is the front panel section, and if you look, there's in the centermost of your screen, there's the largest connector right here is for this ribbon cable, and this ribbon cable is used for powering the night shot LEDs, the record or tally light, as some people refer to it as. All of that is carried through that single ribbon cable, and so if you somehow inadvertently cut that or damage it in any way, shape, or form, it can be replaced, but again, you're just making more work for yourself, because now you need to hunt down a replacement ribbon cable, and they are becoming harder to find, especially as camcorders of this age and vintage are beginning to fade into obscurity, and finding just the parts for them is a very difficult thing to do. We've now gained further access to the tape mechanism itself. This may be enough for most people to resolve their problems with a camcorder's failing to eject the tape, if that's all they wish to accomplish with disassembling the camcorder. This is as far as they wish to proceed, unless I'm greatly mistaken. UXW Bill's video mentions that you can even get away with using a 9-volt, but being that it's running at a much higher voltage than probably the 5 or 6 volts it's intended to operate at, it's going to eject very rapidly, and so you want to be very careful. You notice this part right here is loose. It shouldn't be. It should be firmly mounted in place and only activated or movable through the camcorder's own power. I should not be able to move this part freely like this, at least with the minute amount of force that I'm applying to it. Now, if you're working on this camcorder and don't intend to replace this entire mechanism, care must be paid to avoiding coming into contact inadvertently with the tape drum, either with your screw or anything else for that matter, as scratching it will definitely ruin its and your day all at the same time. Yes, I am in fact right. You can see what's happening here. This is what's keeping this from ejecting properly. Look very closely at those white gears as I eject the tape now. See that? That is not at all supposed to happen. There's this piece of metal that shouldn't even be there in the first place that somehow was damaged and came out of alignment. You can see what's going on. This is probably what was causing those problems with the camcorder in the first place, because as I dug into it I realized that its ailments were not limited to just the loose rubber roller. There were several other hidden gremlins just waiting to rear their ugly heads after getting a false sense of hope for this camcorder. Removal of the screw at the top here, a screw below the USB connection, and then a total of 4 screws on the bottom. I believe that's all. We can now very carefully pry this away from the remainder, what's left of the camcorder. Again, paying great attention and care to these ribbon cables. As I mentioned earlier in this video, the display had ceased functioning properly, and it was of no fault of the LCD panel. It actually had something to do with this main circuit board. And when I went ahead and swapped the display, this was the farthest point my disassembly of this camcorder reached. I needed to remove this cable over here, and then this cable over here. That allowed me easy access to swap the screen and not have this attached to the main camera. And then to swap the LCD display, you need to remove this connector over here and this connector over here. Those two are used for the display. It's a fairly simple process actually to swap out the display. All that's necessary for you to do, if I'm not mistaken, is remove this piece here that has the ribbon cable and these various connectors on it. And then this piece of plastic lifts off from the rest of the cabinet, and then from there you can gain access to what I believe is a hidden screw. Remove this piece of plastic right here, keeps this hinge securely fastened on the screen. So to swap this screen without replacing the entire cabinet assembly, you just remove that piece of plastic, disconnect these two cables, and you should be home free. Then just repeat the process to reassemble it. The disconnection of this USB port from the main board is suspicious, highly suspicious. This was not at all done by me. The moment I cracked open the cabinet section, I took a look in here, just an initial examination, and I noticed that this is completely disconnected. And it's also missing the small piece of plastic that makes it much easier to insert this into the connector. Maybe somebody's poking around on the inside of this camcorder where they probably shouldn't have been prior to my doing so is what's causing the problems. Maybe they noticed there was something wrong with the board, and then they maybe wanted to open it up to see if they could try to fix it somehow, which is next to impossible unless you just replace the whole board itself, and either never connected this or couldn't connect it and just left it disconnected, which would explain why the USB port doesn't work. With the lens assembly successfully removed, there are a total of 3 screws that you need to remove that affix it to the main body of the camcorder. One here, one over here, and then one right over there. And as you carefully pull it up, I would advise you to tilt it up, tilt the front of the lens down toward the table or surface that you have it sitting on, because there's a small claw. The Sony mini DV camcorders seem to have a pretty widespread issue with their optics and the image sensors failing, so you just get a blank display. You could use it to play back previously recorded tapes, you just can't use it to record since you can't see anything. So if that's what you need to replace, you're pretty much set and ready to go. I've removed that, and of course to remove this entire lens assembly, you're also going to need to remove this back portion, which is responsible for the record button, the power state, the controls on there for VCR and recording modes, and there's a single screw that you need to remove. Sony went to the trouble of adding arrows to indicate which screws need to be removed and which screws shouldn't be, so the rest of these screws do not and should not be removed if you're just trying to get access to the rest of the camcorder. So this is completely separate now, and this shouldn't be too much of a task to swap out this USB jack if it is in fact defective, because it's going to prove to be very troublesome to try to get this small minuscule ribbon cable connected back to its correct connection on the board without that supporting piece of plastic, because otherwise you'll try to push this in and it just wants to flex and bend. With everything disconnected, it's beginning to look less like a camcorder and more of, well, something else entirely. We still have the top portion of the tape transport controls, which we will need to remove to finally gain access to just the mechanism, nothing more, nothing less. And if I'm not mistaken, I am going to need to remove this panel over here, responsible for the halogen spotlight and the input and output jacks. There are a total of 2 screws that you need to remove, and then once you remove that, It's just a simple matter of removing, I believe it's this screw down here, not the one on this black piece of metal, but down on that on the board itself, right above this strange piece of plastic. After removing this aluminum bracket from the bottommost portion of the remainder of the camcorder's chassis, we can get easy access to the tape drum. The board you're looking at is not one which would typically come in a Digital 8 Handycam, a TRV140 specifically. This is a board that comes from the TRV608, which has yet to be disassembled and have its board taken out of and swapped with the one that it should be. Now this is, for all intents and purposes, the end of the line, so to speak, in terms of our disassembly and diagnosis of this camcorder's troubles. I can go so far as to remove this top cover, which is what you would need to do, and I will continue on with that. It's actually very simple. There's one, two, it may actually be it, just two screws holding this piece of metal over the modular tape mechanism. And the way that Sony wants for you to go about repairing it is to simply replace it. The parts are too terribly small and just too minute for most anyone, even with the best of eyesight and coordination and maneuvering, to replace various components and parts that may have come out of alignment or just be broken altogether. So this just removes out of place like that, and you can see that it's pop riveted in place. So Sony does not at all intend for anyone, doesn't intend for any aspect of this mechanism itself to be user serviceable. So the only thing, in fact, that you can easily remove and replace is the drum. The head drums rarely fail, unlike the rest of the parts of this mechanism, and so you could end up saving yourself a considerable deal of expense just by buying the mechanism sans the tape drum, and then you just remove the 3 screws holding it in place. I believe there are 3 screws. Yes, there are 3 screws that are holding it in place. There's one there, and one in that recessed hole, and I can remove this drum and reuse this. But I don't know what happened here also. This piece of metal, I don't know what purpose that serves. Looks to me like that's what should be making contact with the back of the tape drum, and it isn't. It's bent up. So this contact obviously isn't working. So this whole tape mechanism, somebody has been in here prior to my doing so and has really done a number on it. I don't know why. It just seems like I have the worst of luck when buying used equipment. If anyone may recall that Gemini PT1000 turntable that somebody just, again, did a real number on in terms of just jury-rigging things. They soldered the audio output connections wrong, ended up causing a short, and the audio was out of phase. It just didn't work properly. The solder job looked worse than what a dog or monkey could manage. It was just atrocious. It's going to take a longer length of time than I originally anticipated for the replacement parts to come in. So for now, until I receive those parts, it's time to shut down this work table and just leave things as is. Let's hope no little gremlins come in and cause these screws to go missing. If you noticed, we see a Handycam. This is the Digital 8 DCR-TRV140. And look at what we have on the screen. We have a color display that hasn't dimmed, isn't flickering, and is displaying none of the anomalous behavior that was evident in the original board. I didn't pick up the camcorder and document it. I probably should have, but I just wanted to get down to brass tacks after being delayed a number of days. I just wanted to get this done with. I need access back to my so-called workbench, and having a bunch of camcorder parts and screws and other components strewn across the tabletop is just not at all good. And not to mention, probably giving it a few more days and screws would start go missing, as would various components and other aspects of the repair process. The replacement mechanism I bought unfortunately suffers from the chronic loose pinch roller plague. If you look over here and the camera ever decides to focus in this decade, you will see that this metal post right here is what is responsible. If I didn't, where did it just, there it is, is responsible for housing or retaining this rubber roller in place. And there's supposed to be a plastic clip on the inside of here that works to keep this from falling out and ending up somewhere else in the camcorder. May have been the cause of the problems as pertains to this camcorder's tape mechanism. This may have fallen out and caused some aspect of it to become jammed and thus not eject the tape. I don't know, but maybe that's what actually caused the damage in the first place. A single rubber roller, as small as it is, fell somewhere where it shouldn't have and ended up wreaking havoc on the tape mechanism. It just sort of a cascading failure, if you will. So now we just need to pop a tape into it and test it. And so for this, I'll just use this high 8 tape I have on hand. Let's hope that this doesn't have an appetite for high 8 cassettes. And you can see how the mechanism loads the tape. Okay, that's not good. Oh yes, that's right. You can see, because I'm talking here and not paying attention, this is why I didn't want to pick up the camcorder when I was in the thick of reassembling this camcorder. This tape roller's missing. Take a look at where it should go. See that pin right above this metal post? That rubber roller is supposed to be there. It isn't. And because of that, there's not enough friction to keep this tape in place. I believe this is the erase head. I could very well be wrong, but the camcorder is smart enough to realize that there's a lack of tension. So I'll eject this tape now. Nope. I will need to somehow jury-rig a plastic, I don't even know what it would be called, a retaining, just the piece of plastic that would go around that metal pin and create enough friction to hold this roller in place. I've seen them selling on eBay for about $15, but let's see if this inserts properly. And yes, you can see that the rubber roller is now in its proper position. And it looks to be working. I'd like to address this ratty looking hand strap. If anyone has ever come across these Handycams used and they have a disgusting hand strap that's peeling, still has the glue remaining on it, or even the vinyl covering that's shredding off. There are 2 holes already drilled through the fabric here of this hand strap, and then this will just loop through this portion over here. So I don't even need to remove this bracket over here for the hand strap. The only one which is necessary to be removed, that which faces the rear of the camcorder, and that's only a single screw. This looks to be very simple. Let me tell you, it really does assist when you come across a stumbling block, or just a mental block for that matter, and you just can't remember how something went back together, despite just having disassembled it not more than a matter of moments ago. You see, there are these 2 metal pieces that are used for securing the hand strap to this piece of plastic. And I took them out. I couldn't quite remember how they went back together. And then I realized that a few inches away, I have the hand strap from the high 8 camcorder. And it should use the same procedure for securing the hand strap. So you can see how they want you to proceed with this. Anyone notice a marked difference in terms of the appearance of this hand strap? It looks to me much more presentable than this. This thing is, well, I might just hold on to it, but this just does not look visually appealing in the least. Notice something over there in the foreground of the video right now, or what is now known as the foreground since I've zoomed in on it. The screws are gone. I was able to reassemble this camcorder, and to my great amazement, I had not a single screw to spare. That's always a good sign. I need to reassemble the high 8 camcorder. So don't worry, I'll spare you from the reassembly procedures of that camcorder.